Nadlu tampendi gana mayuna yeta matanya wamataranyako. Gana mayunako yutako taikoringa tawila. Panako tapaparuna bultur yalchakuma nadlu. By which I wish to say, with respect to Ghana speakers, we acknowledge the Ghana people and their spiritual relationship with the land as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide region, and acknowledge their living culture, heritage and beliefs. Well, I very much appreciate the invitation to come and make some comments today on the issue of federation and all that is implied by federation. Michael, you spoke about pipe dreams. Well, I think all of us do have pipe dreams about these matters, having been involved in local government and then later in state government and then later in community organisations through my working career so far. I've done a lot of thinking about what my pipe dream would be if some power that be could come to me and say, Lynn, how would you structure the Federation of Australia? Maybe it was vested interest that saw me so interested in the preservation of state government when I was there for 15 years. But I now find myself actually asking the question, what is the relevance of state governments as currently structured in the way we do things in this country? However, I'm not going to pursue that point too far because that verges on pipe dream. Michael has already spoken about the 40-4 score of referenda in this country. It does not look promising that we could actually make significant change that required a constitutional change. That being said, I do, however, hope that we will make one major change to our constitution in the coming 2-3 years, and that is with respect to the recognition of the first inhabitants of this country, not only as the first inhabitants, but as the ongoing full participants in Australia. But so that constitutional change, I hope, will echo the success of the 1967 one. But beyond that, I suppose if we go down a path of trying to say, should the issues in this document be delivered by a constitutional set of changes or by some other means, I'm inclined to think, in fact, that they will have to be by other means, and maybe indeed they should be by other means. Again, Michael, you made the comment that ever since colonial times, the changes that have been made in this country have only ever successfully succeeded when they have involved widespread engagement. And I can recall Neil Andrew, the then Speaker of the Federal Parliament, when there was the special ceremony, the joint sitting on the Centenary of Federation that was held in the Exhibition Building in Melbourne, where indeed that first joint sitting had been held. And he made the point at the time that all the men, and they were all men at the time in terms of the Founding Fathers, went into that Parliament, that was the weakness of it, of course, went into that situation. They went in with viewpoints and they came out with different viewpoints. Nobody left the room or that Parliament with the same viewpoint they entered into it. Essentially what he was saying is that process is part of the entire raison d'etre of the game or the activity of federation. And so in that sense, I feel very heartened by the fact that we needn't just rely upon the fact that we have a platform called the Constitution. We have a capacity for process, and the richness that we give that process will determine the quality of the federation we have in the 21st century. Having been a Premier at the first COAG meetings in that brief window of opportunity when I was Premier, I was able to see the aspiration that was being striven for in the establishment of COAG. It was a process issue, trying to improve things that had been going awry since the 1940 redefinition of the taxation arrangements in this country. Since those taxation arrangements, it had deteriorated further and further and further, so that you had the mockery of premiers and treasurers waiting for not the offer, but the statement of what the federal government was going to give be slipped under the doors of their hotel room where they were staying, gathered for the premier's conferences. COAG was an attempt to rewrite that whole process. It did, of course, amongst other things, not only recognise 2 levels of government, it recognised 3, and local government was involved in that process. It was an attempt to say that really we want a process whereby the stakeholders in our federation will be able to deliver something in a collaborative sense. I'm very taken with a number of things in the report, and one of the things, it doesn't actually say it directly, but I interpreted the sense of what it says, was to refer to the Federation almost as a kind of third House of Parliament. That we might have a situation where a government may dominate the lower and the upper houses of our parliament. But the Act of Federation gives the Australian voters a chance to re-engage in a way that means there is a third house of parliament called the federal system, the federation system. And so if one government may dominate at a federal level, then the variety of opinions around the state levels will act as a brake on the way in which that works. Now that issue of the process then gives us some very real opportunities, and I want to make some specific comments about some of those points in a minute, conscious of the time constraints that I have. But I want to start from some founding principles that I think become very important. If the issue is to be about process between whom? Stephen Martin, in his introduction, used the phrase a properly functioning federation. Well, what is the definition of functioning? Functioning for who? And I think we actually need to determine what is the starting point. I very much like the fact that we were the Commonwealth of Australia, because Commonwealth derives from a somewhat archaic word these days, but commonweal, the common welfare, the common being, the common well-being rather. And that really put in place the right ordering of things. Mein Kampf has made an appearance here in what was for a moment just a little bit of a chilling entry onto the stage, but I understood exactly the point you were making, Michael, that here was a proposition that was the absolute alternative, the mirror image of the commonweal approach. It was a suggestion that there should be a central being where the state was the all-powerful entity, albeit there for the purpose of some mythical, ideal human being, but nevertheless it was the state. The commonweal emphasis starts the other way around. The people not at the bottom of the triangle, but at the top of the triangle. Now, I'm impressed in a number of areas where the report refers to consumer-focused and community-centric activities, but I'm not actually sure I yet feel comfortable enough that it goes far enough in those very issues. I, as was mentioned by Hamilton, worked in the not-for-profit sector. I spent 11 years working for World Vision. It meant I had the opportunity to be engaged overseas in an enormous amount of community development work. I really wish I had known when I was in government what I learnt from the process of community development when I was with a not-for-profit. One of the problems of governments is that they actually have power. They have power in terms of the power relationship with community. And so often when we're referring to the consumer or the client in this document, really the subtext is that that consumer or client is not people. It is some other agency of delivery, be it the state government or be it whatever. And that is not what ought to be the situation. Working in World Vision, and this is not just simply an ad for them, I'd say exactly the same for other agencies that work in community development overseas. They long ago learned that unless you had co-governance and co-design of programs in community, you were not going to make headway. They learned it very simply because they never had any mandate. When those organisations go into a community to work, they have absolutely no mandate. They can't force the community to do anything. They have to buy in the community. So that pragmatic factor then delivered a very effective outcome factor, because it brought in the principle that people should be consulted about what their needs are, what their wants are, what their aspirations are, and then they should also be offered and required to be held to account in the delivery of that. And the whole process of co-design and co-governance, I would really hope, can show itself up in our federal situation. It will, in fact, be a much more appropriate recognition of localities and special needs in different parts of our country than the current attempt through simple state boundaries, which are very arbitrarily drawn. Now that then brings into play another issue, that a federation is not simply a political construct, a construct of political balance of powers or interaction of powers. It is actually also a cultural interaction of powers. Now, in the document about the chapter about the diversity of Australia, some very powerful comments are made about that which we all know. This is a very diverse country. But I was a bit sorry that it didn't delve deep enough into that and look at the nature of the way we have to date been able to handle much of that diversity compared to many other countries, and the opportunity from this point on. We see a global debate about multiculturalism that has some very strong views on either side. And you're expected to line up as either being fiercely pro-multicultural or fiercely against it. And yet that international debate is a bankrupt debate because it is not comparing like with like. The term multiculturalism in Europe is actually applied and means different things to what it has been meaning in this country and what it has the potential to mean further in this country. And so in that sense, we have to understand that federation is a cultural federation, and the document seems to imply that if you have more devolution of authority, that would allow that diversity to have a greater expression. I feel comfortable and uncomfortable with that proposition. Because in the end, our political federation is premised upon certain basic shared principles. This much has to be. This will be the common footprint. And from this point on, says our political federation, you can do what you wish to do in the different areas of government, be they state or be they local government around the country. But you cannot go in total contrast to the core footprint. A cultural federation must require the same. A cultural federation must agree on certain shared principles about the status of individuals, the status of individuals based on gender, or the status of individuals based on race, or the status of individuals just based on being individuals, as opposed to the power of the collective. Now, in that context, you can have a multiculturalism that is very diverse in its expression, in its activities, in its institutions even. But if it's founded on a shared principle of a footprint, then it would have a genuine multiculturalism about which we could be very proud. But if it didn't, then what you actually have in my argument is polyculturalism. Now, I'm running out of time, so I had a lot of comments I wanted to make on different sections here. One of the things that worries me about the way in which state government situations have happened, I was part of state government bidding against other states. I was a state development minister. We would take trade missions off overseas. I think that was a very good thing to happen. But one of the arguments that happened against it was, well, you're doing just an auction against each other and you're selling the country short by bidding against one state or another. I don't believe it needed to have worked that way, and I don't believe it always did work that way. And I think, again, we come back to a process question. How can you have a proper collaborative environment which allows each to sell themselves the best? You don't stop a person selling their house because the neighbour might sell their house cheaper than you. You still allow that process to take place, but you do it in a way that allows the overall outcome to be for the best. Finally, because I am running out of time here, I want to make the comment that things that concern me, or why I feel the need for federation as opposed to a centralist kind of structure, is that we have an organic country because we move around. Yes, we live on a set piece of land, but we have an organic country, people moving around the place and changing population drifts from one area to another, that basically don't live over the whole country. They live in two slices. Essentially, the southeast boomerang that runs from the north of Queensland right down the coast over as far as Adelaide and to an extent to the Iron Triangle, and then another area on the bottom, the southwest of West Australia. The tendency of that boomerang, according to ordinary forces, is to shrink back to the hubs, Sydney and Melbourne. The purpose of the federation process has been to allow that not necessarily to happen, to give opportunities for the ends of that southeast boomerang to keep vitality and vibrancy. And so if we're going to look at a process of federation, it has to be a process that enables not just the natural forces which would default to shrinking back, to be countered by forces that actually allow opportunity to exist elsewhere in the country. Thank you.